The data types and classes that we've encountered so far: numeric arrays, character arrays, Boolean arrays, references to functions, and we just have learned about container arrays called cell arrays. Structure arrays can also be used to group together different types of data in one object. They're very closely related to cell arrays. Let's create a one-by-one struct with 3 fields by direct assignment. Here I assign to the name field of the variable student the character string Fred Smith, to the SID field the student identification number of Fred, and finally to the scores field his 4 test scores. This has created a variable named student. It's a structure. The class is struct, and at this point it has 3 fields. Let's try this in Matlab. Let's start with the whos command to see that there's no variables in the workspace, and then we'll assign the variable student by creating its name field. And now if we execute whos, we see that there is something in the workspace. The variable is named student. It's of class struct, and its size is 1 by 1. Notice that student.Name is not a variable in the workspace. The variable is simply student. We can now continue and assign an SID number. Let's see what happens in the workspace. Everything remains the same. There's still only one variable named student. It's a struct. Notice that the number of bytes required to store student is larger. That's because we added a field. Let's add the final field and execute one more whos to see that the behavior is as expected. Still one variable, still 1 by 1. The number of bytes used to store it is growing. We've created an object, student, by assigning some values to fields. We saw in the Matlab window that student is the object. It's a 1 by 1 struct. In this case it has 3 fields, and the field names are name, SID, and scores. Very obvious from the syntax. If we check the size of student, Matlab confirms that it's 1 by 1. The class, it's a struct. The field names of student, in this case Matlab will return a cell array of names. That makes sense because the field names are typically of different lengths, and a cell array is the most convenient way to store a list of character arrays all with different lengths. The command isfield returns a Boolean, true or false, depending on whether the character string given is a field of the first argument. Name is a field of student, but names is not a field of student, and that will return false. Let's try this. The size of student is 1 by 1. The class of student is struct. The field names of student is a 3 by 1 cell array. Name is a field of the variable student, and names is not a field. The syntax for accessing fields of a struct, both for reference and assignment, is very natural. We access the contents of a field using dot reference along with the field name in the form object name dot field name. So in this case, student.Name is the character array Fred Smith. Student.SID is the 1 by 1 student identification number, and student.Scores is the 1 by 4 array of test scores. The elements of these objects can be further referenced or assigned new values as you would expect. For example, if we want to look at the first and last element of Fred's test scores, we use this construction. Student.Scores is the 1 by 4 array. We want to access the first and last element, so we use a parentheses reference and we simply list the elements. That, of course, returns the array 62, 61. Assignment is very similar. Suppose after regrading we need to change the third score to 99. So student.Scores, the third element, we assign a new value 99. Simply try this stuff out in Matlab. Name is Fred Smith. SID and scores. Let's reference the first and last score. Parentheses reference, and then the indices of what we'd like. Let's change the third score to a 99. I left the semicolon off, and now we see the display for a struct. The field names are listed and the values are listed. With this grade change, let's see what Fred's average score is now. Here I've got the sum of his scores divided by the number in the scores. That should compute the average. And he's got a 75, not doing too bad. Struct objects seem very useful, given that a good choice for the field names makes it very easy to understand the meaning of the data that's stored in the object. I could use a struct to keep track of E7 students. The issue is that there's 120 of you, and right now student is only 1 by 1. But remember, every object in Matlab is an array, and you can grow an object by simply assigning beyond its current dimension. So I could assign values to a second entry and to a third entry and so on. Let's think about how that first assignment to the second entry would look. Which of these seems like the proper assignment statement? We're trying to grow the student array to include her. Let's do that in a quiz.